Hi, welcome. Enjoy the content, subscribe, and turn on notifications.
8 years ago, Harrison met Celeste. And if you had asked him back then, he would have sworn he'd found the woman of his dreams. There was something about her that fascinated him, something that went beyond her obvious beauty. Celeste wasn't just pretty, she had her own glow, a vibrant energy that made any room feel more alive. Her smile was enchanting, one of those smiles that hypnotize you and make you forget everything around you. She spoke with a captivating confidence, in a way that made even the most ordinary stories sound extraordinary. Harrison still remembered perfectly the first time he saw her. It was in a busy downtown cafe on an ordinary afternoon that, until that moment, hadn't seemed special at all. He was by himself, enjoying a rare break from work, when Celeste walked in. She was wearing a red coat and moved with a determined stride, like she knew exactly where she wanted to go. When she ordered her coffee, her voice was firm yet gentle, and for an instant, it felt like the entire place went silent. Harrison couldn't explain it, but something in him stirred. He watched her, looking for an excuse to start a conversation. Fate, however, took care of that for him. As soon as Celeste grabbed her coffee cup, she accidentally bumped into a man walking by, spilling part of her drink on the white blouse she wore under her coat. "Great," she muttered, staring at the stain with frustration. That was when Harrison saw his chance. "Looks like today isn't going your way," he commented with a half-smile. She looked at him, clearly annoyed, but then she laughed. "You have no idea." And that's how it started. The conversation flowed in a way Harrison had never experienced before. Within minutes, they were already laughing together, like old friends. When they said goodbye, he knew he couldn't just let her walk out of his life. He worked up the courage to ask if he could see her again. To his surprise, Celeste didn't hesitate. She wrote her number on a napkin and said, "Call me. But only if you know how to impress me." And he called. And he impressed her. The following months were a whirlwind of emotions. Each date felt better than the last. Harrison found himself anxious to see her, counting the hours until their next meeting. Celeste was fun, spontaneous, bursting with energy. She loved surprises and always said life was too short to be predictable. And Harrison, who had always been a more reserved, methodical man, felt that with her, he was learning to see the world in a different light. They traveled whenever they could. Simple places, but full of memories. A little cabin in the mountains, where they spent an entire weekend cooking together and laughing at their own disastrous attempts at making pancakes. A hidden beach, where Celeste ran straight into the ocean and tried to pull Harrison in with her, not caring about their clothes or the fact that the water was freezing. They were small moments, but they meant everything to him. It was on one of those trips that Harrison realized he wanted to spend the rest of his life with Celeste. They were sitting by a lake, the sky reflecting on the water, and she was talking about her dreams. They weren't grandiose dreams. Celeste didn't want riches, she didn't want fame. She wanted experiences, unforgettable moments. And at that instant, Harrison knew he wanted to be part of those moments forever. The proposal came shortly after, during a candlelit dinner. Celeste laughed when she saw the ring. "Are you sure about this?" she teased, but her eyes glowed with the same excitement as his. When she said yes, Harrison felt like everything made sense. Their first years of marriage were as good as he had imagined, better, even. They still traveled, still laughed, still had fun together. Harrison worked hard, but he didn't mind, because he knew he was building a life with the woman he loved. And Celeste seemed happy. But time has a cruel way of changing things without us noticing. What used to be spontaneity started feeling like restlessness. What used to be a thirst for adventure began to sound like dissatisfaction. Little details went unnoticed at first, because Harrison didn't want to see them. But before he knew it, the vibrant woman who once made him feel like life was full of possibilities began to drift away. And one day, Harrison realized that the Celeste he'd fallen in love with seemed to be disappearing. Harrison had always believed that marriage problems started with something big, a serious fight, an unforgivable mistake, a clear betrayal. But what he learned was that most of the time, love doesn't collapse all at once. It wears down slowly, like a rope fraying until it can't hold the weight anymore. The changes in Celeste started so subtly they were almost imperceptible. Little things that, at first, he dismissed. She used to be excited for home-cooked dinners and movie nights on the couch. Now, she kept canceling those plans because she was tired or not in the mood. But oddly enough, the next day, she seemed full of energy to go out with friends or attend events she'd never shown much interest in before. In the beginning, Harrison tried not to make a big deal out of it. Maybe it was just a phase, maybe she was bored with the routine. But then the signs started to multiply. Celeste began going out more and more, coming home late, always with a ready excuse. It was a company happy hour, she'd say, or I needed to talk to a friend who's going through a tough time. But what bothered Harrison wasn't the fact that she went out. It was the way she came home, the strong perfume that wasn't hers, her eyes shining like she had experienced something he'd never be part of, the distant way she gave him a quick peck on the cheek before heading straight for the shower, without saying more than 2 words to him. At first, he tried to rationalize. Maybe he was just imagining things. After all, Celeste had always been sociable, always loved having fun. But then came the money. Harrison was never a controlling type, but he'd always been good at managing the couple's finances. They lived comfortably, but Celeste started spending in a different way. Expensive purchases, dresses and handbags he never saw her wear, dinners paid for at places they'd never been to together. When he tried to talk about it, she just gave him an impatient look. "You're overreacting, Harrison. I work, I can spend my money however I want." Her tone was cutting, a clear warning that there was no room for that conversation. But the spending didn't stop. On the contrary, it only got worse. He even noticed a charge from a 5-star hotel and asked her about it. Celeste laughed. "It was a gift for my cousin. She was going through a rough time, so I thought she needed a day off." The problem? Celeste had never mentioned this cousin before. Harrison's unease grew every day. What started as a suspicion turned into a constant ache, a weight on his chest that he didn't know what to do with. Then came the night that changed everything. It was a Friday. Harrison had decided to do something different, a surprise. He left work early, stopped by Celeste's favorite restaurant, and ordered dinner. Bought wine, got everything ready for a special night, like in the old days. But Celeste didn't come home at her usual time. 8 o'clock. He sent a message. No response. 9 o'clock. He called. Her phone was off. 10 o'clock. The food was already cold. Midnight. The wine had turned bitter in his mouth. When he finally heard the key in the lock, he felt a mix of relief and anger. Celeste walked in calmly, without the slightest hint of guilt. She was wearing a dress he'd never seen before. And the smell, an intense, unfamiliar perfume, mixed with a faint scent of alcohol. She saw him sitting on the couch, still holding an empty wine glass. "Why are you looking at me like that?" she asked, smirking, as if he were overreacting. "Where were you?" Harrison's voice came out lower than he intended. Celeste shrugged. "With the girls. You know how it is, time just flew by." But something in her eyes, the way she avoided looking directly at him, told Harrison there was more to this story than she was saying. And in that moment, for the first time, he felt that he was losing Celeste. And maybe he'd already lost her a long time ago. After that night, something shifted in Harrison. Until then, he'd clung to the hope that he was just exaggerating, that everything was just paranoia. But when Celeste walked in without a trace of guilt, wearing a new dress he didn't recognize, carrying a scent that wasn't hers, Harrison knew. They weren't just suspicions, it was real. But knowing and proving are two different things. And more than that, he needed to accept it. In the days that followed, Celeste acted as if nothing had happened. She carried on with her usual routine of going out, vague excuses, and that distant look, as if the house they shared was just a place she slept in sometimes. She was there, and yet she wasn't. And Harrison, who once tried not to see, now noticed everything. He began paying closer attention. Little details he used to ignore now screamed at him. Like the fact that Celeste's phone was never out of her sight. Or how she'd quickly lock the screen, change the subject, or walk away whenever he entered the same room. Or how she took calls in a lower, sharper tone, like she was hiding something. Then came the first blow. It was a Tuesday night, and Harrison was alone in the living room when Celeste's phone buzzed on the dining table. She was in the shower, and for the first time, he allowed himself to do what he'd always sworn he'd never do, he picked up her phone. The screen lit up. Grant Blueheart, his stomach lurched. A name he'd never heard before. And that heart symbol next to the name? It felt like someone had driven a knife into his chest. Harrison wanted to open the message, but the phone was locked. He knew if he tried to guess the password and got it wrong, the phone might lock completely and Celeste would notice. So he put it back in its place and tried to calm his mind. But he couldn't. In the following days, Harrison became a different man. He barely slept. He couldn't focus at work. Every smile Celeste gave him, every superficial touch, every quick kiss before she went out became unbearable. He needed to know the truth. That was when he made the decision that would change everything. He hired a private investigator. His name was Doyle. A discreet, seasoned professional who didn't beat around the bush. When Harrison told him the situation, Doyle just nodded and said, "Give me a week." So Harrison did. But a week can feel like an eternity when you're certain your life is about to collapse. During those first days, he tried to act normal, but the tension was crushing. Celeste, oblivious to the storm brewing, kept up her excuses and outings, unaware that Harrison already knew something was wrong. On the fifth day, Harrison's phone rang. It was Doyle. "I've got what you need," he said in a calm, professional tone. "I'll send you the photos now." Harrison took a deep breath when the first image appeared on his screen. Celeste, walking into a high-end restaurant. The second photo showed her at a table, laughing. The third showed a dark-haired, well-dressed man holding her hand. The fourth, the two of them kissing. Harrison's world stopped. He stared at the photos once, twice, 3 times. But there was no denying it anymore. He wasn't crazy. He wasn't exaggerating. Celeste was cheating on him. And the other man's name was Grant. Harrison gripped his phone so tightly his knuckles went white. The images stayed there, unmoving on the screen, but they felt alive in his mind, like a scene he'd witnessed in person. Celeste smiling, holding that man's hand, both of them together without a care in the world. As if he, her husband, had never existed. Pain hit him first. A slow, deep stab in his chest. But it was quickly replaced by something stronger, anger. He'd spent years dedicating his life to that marriage. He worked hard to make sure Celeste had everything she wanted, gave up his own time, his rest, even his own wishes, all so she'd be happy. And this was how she repaid him. He didn't sleep that night. He sat in the living room, staring at nothing, while the clock ticked monotonously on the wall. Every minute that passed brought him closer to the inevitable. The next morning, he didn't go to work. He had something more important to do. He took the evidence Doyle had sent and went to see a lawyer. He asked that the divorce papers be drawn up as soon as possible. It was over. There would be no arguments, no second chances. Celeste had made her choice. Now it was time for Harrison to make his. 2 nights later, he waited. Celeste had gone out again. This time, she didn't even bother with an elaborate excuse. She just said she was going out with some friends and didn't know when she'd be back. Harrison quietly laughed to himself. She wasn't even trying to hide it anymore. When midnight passed, he knew she wouldn't be back anytime soon. So he opened a bottle of wine, laid the divorce papers on the living room table, and settled on the couch to wait. The key turned in the lock close to 3 in the morning. Celeste came in, giggling softly, like she was trying not to make noise. But when she looked up and saw Harrison sitting there, her eyes flickered with something he hadn't seen in a long time: surprise. "What are you doing up?" she asked, shutting the door behind her. Harrison didn't answer right away. He just picked up one of the photos Doyle had given him and placed it on the table. Celeste looked at it, curious, until her expression completely changed. Her eyes widened for a split second, but as usual, she tried to regain her composure. "What is this?" she asked, trying to sound firm. Harrison placed more photos on the table. This time, there was no denying anything. There she was, with Grant. Celeste opened her mouth, but no words came out. For the first time, she seemed at a loss. "Is there something you want to tell me?" Harrison asked, his voice cold. She looked at the photos, then at him. She took a deep breath. Then, to his surprise, she laughed. "So you followed me? Hired someone to spy on me?" My God, Harrison, how pathetic. He had expected anything: denial, apologies, maybe tears. But that arrogance was the final confirmation that Celeste no longer cared. Without a word, he pulled out the divorce papers and slid them across the table toward her. "Sign." Celeste picked up the papers, flipped through them quickly, and let out a dry laugh. "Oh, so this is it? You think you can just throw everything away?" Harrison leaned forward. "I'm not the one who threw everything away, Celeste. You did that when you decided to cheat on me." Her expression changed. For the first time in that conversation, a flicker of concern crossed her face. "Harrison, let's talk this out. I know you're hurt, but we can work through it. You've always been so understanding." He stood up. "I was understanding for too long. I'm done now." Celeste watched him in silence. Then she crossed her arms and gave him a half-smile. "And what if I don't sign?" Harrison laughed. He had expected that resistance. "Sign now, or we can do it the hard way. I can bring this evidence to a judge and make sure you walk away from this marriage with nothing. Your choice." Celeste pressed her lips together. Harrison knew her well. He knew she never planned to leave the marriage without getting something out of it. But faced with the possibility of losing everything, she had no choice. With a frustrated look, she grabbed a pen and signed. When she finished, she left the papers on the table and stared at him. "You're going to regret this." Harrison picked up the documents and gave her one last look. "No. You're the one who will." Then, without looking back, he walked out. And for the first time in a long while, he felt free. The days that followed were strangely quiet. Harrison had spent so long caught in the emotional turmoil of a failing marriage that now, with everything over, it felt like the world was moving in slow motion. The divorce paperwork was being processed, Celeste had moved out, and for the first time in years, he was alone. But it wasn't a suffocating loneliness. On the contrary. It was a freedom he hadn't realized he needed. Without Celeste, the house felt bigger. Before, he avoided coming home late. He made sure to be present and keep up the routine of a marriage that, deep down, had died a long time ago. Now, he came home whenever he wanted. He read a book uninterrupted. He chose what to watch on TV without any complaints. He cooked for himself without needing to impress anyone. All those little things that had been erased over the years returned, and he realized something important: he didn't miss her. Celeste, on the other hand, didn't take long to start missing him. The messages came quietly at first. A simple, "Hey," in the middle of the week. Ignored. Then a, "Hope you're doing okay." Also ignored. Then a missed call. Then another. And another. Harrison didn't need to pick up to know what she wanted. He knew exactly what had happened. Grant, the man Celeste had thrown everything away for, wasn't the Prince Charming she'd expected. Relationships built on betrayal rarely last, and hers was no exception. What started as an exciting affair soon became ordinary, without the thrill of a forbidden secret. Grant lost interest, moved on, and Celeste was left alone. And when she realized she'd lost Harrison for good, she panicked. It was on a rainy afternoon that he saw her for the first time since the divorce. She showed up unannounced, standing in front of the building where he now lived. She looked different. Her once flawless hair now seemed dull. The arrogance once in her eyes was gone. "Can we talk?" she asked, her voice hesitant. Harrison folded his arms, watching her for a few seconds. Part of him felt sorry for her. But only for a moment. "About what?" "About us." He let out a short laugh, shaking his head. "There is no us anymore, Celeste." She lowered her gaze, taking a deep breath. "I made a mistake." Harrison raised an eyebrow. "You're just realizing that now?" She lifted her eyes, and for a moment, she seemed like a different person. She wasn't the confident, vibrant Celeste he'd met years ago. Nor the cold, calculating woman he'd confronted during the divorce. She looked broken. "I didn't know what I had until I lost it," she admitted, her voice trembling. "Grant, he never really cared. I thought," she stopped, pressing her lips together. "I thought I wanted a different life. But everything I wanted was right here. You." Harrison felt something inside him close off. For the longest time, all he wanted to hear was that Celeste chose him, that she regretted everything. But now, those words meant nothing. "Celeste, I spent years trying to be good enough for you. Trying to figure out what you wanted, trying to keep a marriage going by myself. But you decided to cut me out of your life long before signing those papers." She stepped forward, trying to take his hand, but he pulled away. "I can fix this," she pleaded. "Give me a chance." He let out a low chuckle. "Tell me, Celeste, if Grant hadn't dumped you, would you even be here right now?" She froze. She had no answer. Because they both knew the truth. She was only there because her gamble hadn't paid off. Because she realized Harrison was the only stable thing she'd ever had. But he wasn't a consolation prize. Celeste started crying, but Harrison felt nothing. No anger, no pain, no desire for revenge. Just indifference. "You made your choice," he said, opening the building door and stepping inside. "Now live with it." And without looking back, he left her there in the rain, weighed down by the consequences of her own decisions. That night, Harrison slept deeply for the first time in years. Thank you for watching the video. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you won't miss any updates. See you next time.